Hello, Tara here. We're on chapter 13 of Not by Sight, and Marcus just showed up at Roxwood's place and is trying to catch Grace in the act of spying. Let's see if Grace causes any suspicion, basically. Would you like to see the field where the women are baling hay, Sir Marcus? Indeed I would, Miss Mabry. Please, take us where you will. Grace drove the Daimler along a road past the south pasture where yesterday she'd worked the aerator. This morning the baler was already chugging away as Claire added forkfuls of hay into its maw. Lucy and Mrs. Vance tied off each bale with wire, while Becky loaded them off to the side to be weighed. Mr. Tillman was even now assembling the tripod scale. Looks like back-breaking work, Sir Marcus said from the back seat. Very much so, and it's still morning, she said. When noon arrives and the sun is directly overhead, it will be twice as hot, and the working conditions even more difficult. Grace felt chagrined seeing her WFC sisters at labor. She'd promised Mrs. Vance to take up the slack from losing Agnes, yet here she was, driving Jack and his friend around on a tour. Still, she had to admit she enjoyed being with Jack again. He sat next to her, looking quite handsome, in a white linen suit that fit snug across his broad shoulders. Again, broad shoulders. I'm sorry. Is there any other type of man in a romance story? Broad shoulders, broad shoulders, broad shoulders. He wore a smart-looking felt trilby today instead of his usual brown motoring cap. She wondered if he'd had his discussion with Miss Arnold, or if he continued to avoid her. Agnes mentioned he'd immediately retired after Grace left the night of her arrival. This morning, when Knowles let her in, Grace had caught a glimpse of a dark skirt ascending the stairs before disappearing from view. She couldn't tell if it was Miss Arnold, Agnes, or the companion, Mrs. Grant. She wondered if Miss Arnold had been invited to come along this morning. Grace was relieved at her absence. Being in the woman's company, particularly while driving, would be unnerving. How long have you been with the Women's Forage Corps, Miss Mabry? Grace glanced over her shoulder at Sir Marcus. Well over a month. I've been at Roxwood 3 weeks. Oh, she's counting the training time. And do you like it? The work, I mean? She turned back to the road. I had difficulty adjusting at first. I got fired when one of the women pulled a prank and left me to chase a dozen pigs around Lord Roxwood's garden. Pigs? She heard him chuckle. Which woman was it? That is for me to know, Sir Marcus. Oh, there was a bug in my closet. Go away. That is for me to know, Sir Marcus, Grace smiled. We sisters in the WFC keep our secrets for one another. But it was my good fortune Lord Roxwood changed his mind and offered me a job as his part-time driver. The Corps kept me on, as well. More or less, she thought, choosing to omit how Jack had bullied Mrs. Vance into rehiring her. I think perhaps it's been my good fortune, Jack said beside her. His hand rested against the seat between them, and she smiled as she recalled the evening of his birthday. Do you enjoy history, Miss Mabry? Grace reeled in her thoughts and glanced back at Sir Marcus. Why, yes. Has Lord Roxwood taken you to view the old Roman ruins near Richborough? We haven't yet had the occasion, Jack said in a flat tone beside her. Grace noticed the muscle in his jaw tense. Is there a particular reason you wish to visit the ruins, Marcus? Merely because I believe Miss Mabry will find them fascinating. Sir Marcus leaned forward and pointed toward an approaching crossroad. Turn right up there onto Canterbury Road. You'll make another right once you reach Ramsgate Road, heading south. The old Roman road is just a few miles beyond on your right. She did as he instructed, and soon they were traveling along a good stretch of even road. Lord Roxwood tells me you have a brother overseas. Yes, Grace replied. Colin is with the cavalry. You must be proud of him. Very much, though I wish... Yes? Grace hesitated. I wish I could shake this ill feeling. Tell me, Miss Mabry. While he spoke congenially, Grace heard the demand in his voice. Why did he press her? I just miss him, that's all. She looked at Jack, who now sat with arms crossed against his chest. "You and Lord Roxwood share a penchant for asking questions." "I'm merely curious." His words irritated her. Jack once offered her the same excuse. "You know what they say about curiosity and the cat," she quipped hotly. Jack's bark of laughter drowned out any response Sir Marcus might have made. "If you're trying to stir a hornet's nest, Marcus, you've done it," he called back to his friend. Grace felt her cheeks warm as Sir Marcus said, I only wish to get to know Miss Mabry a bit better." To her, he said, "Does he write to you often, your brother?" "I haven't received any correspondence from him in quite some time." She kept her focus on the road ahead. "Lord Roxwood explained to me how army mail is often delayed." "True enough. Do your mother and father write often?" "Marcus." Jack spoke sharply. Grace wondered at the underlying friction between them. Jack's expression below the mask had turned to brooding. Was he angry with Sir Marcus? "I haven't received a post from my father," she answered, "and my mother is dead." "I'm very sorry, Miss Mabry." His genuine condolence appeased her. "Does your father—" "What is your profession, Sir Marcus?" she asked abruptly, as she made the next right turn onto Ramsgate Road. "I beg your pardon?" She glanced at Jack and saw his grin. Her spirits lifted, and she pressed on. "Well, if you wish to ask me so many personal questions, I think it only fair you answer a few in return. Are you a soldier? Home on leave, perhaps?" "He's a lieutenant in the Admiralty," Jack said. "On holiday." Sir Marcus was quick to add. "Ah, a man with a sense of duty, then," Grace said, satisfied. "If she didn't approve of you before, Marcus, she does now," Jack said to his friend. "Miss Mabry is quite the patriot." "Indeed I am," she said, relieved at their easy banter. "How did you and Sir Marcus first meet?" she asked Jack. "We were at Oxford together." Grace's heart gave a little jolt at the genuine warmth in his smile. Marcus was the troublemaker. Sir Marcus let out a snort from the back seat. It seemed the two men had a lasting friendship after all. "Are you married, Sir Marcus?" she asked, thinking to look out for her friend Claire's interest. Jack scowled while Sir Marcus said smoothly, "Is that a proposal, Miss Mabry?" She burst out laughing. "Hardly. I'm merely curious," she said, tossing his words back at him. Jack's features eased, and he chuckled. "Nicely done, Miss Mabry." Even Sir Marcus sounded amused when he said, "I am still looking for the right woman." "Looking for someone who will put up with you mean," Jack said. Grace noticed his mood seemed to be mellowing the farther they drove away from Roxwood. Perhaps distancing himself from his troubles with Miss Arnold? In any event, it was wonderful to be out enjoying the summer day with a bit of camaraderie. It had likely been some time since he and his friend had had an opportunity to do so. She felt grateful to be a part of it. "So, Miss Mabry, is your father—" "Ah, there's the Roman road directly ahead. If you'll take it, we should see the ruins on the right." Relieved to be out from beneath Sir Marcus's scrutiny, Grace made the turn and soon sighted the crumbling walls surrounding what remained of an ancient Roman fort. Retupiae, I have no idea how you're supposed to pronounce this. Retupiae was the original name for Richborough, Sir Marcus said as they drew closer. "The fort was built after the Romans landed in England in AD 43. "It's amazing!" Grace forgot her annoyance as she pulled the car to the side of the road that overlooked the ruins. Her mind conjured visions of soldiers clad in red tunics, helmets, and shoulder plates walking the battlements in search of their enemies. Knowing Jack would wish to be included, she began to describe the place. Crags of gray stone rise out of a green sea like broken teeth, biting at the warm air as though to grasp and reclaim their history, now lost. Roman soldiers, golden eagles, and the flags of Caesar. "I am completely enraptured." Grace looked over her shoulder to see Sir Marcus's smile. Beside her, Jack issued a low, guttural noise. Was he growling? "You make a great storyteller, Miss Mabry." She beamed at him. "I am a writer, an aspiring novelist anyway. Lord Roxwood has come to my aid in honing my skills." "Oh? And what skills would those be?" Grace caught a restless movement beside her. He's helped me to see with my words, to paint pictures with them. We make a game of it. Word games, eh? Sounds like you've been extremely productive, old boy. Jack's mouth tightened. Sir Marcus said, "Did he come up with a game, or did you?" "Oh, he did," she said. "When we first met, I'm ashamed to say I spoke rather unimaginatively. Since then I've practiced every day, even when I bale hay in the fields. I hope one day to write a story about my time here at Roxwood and have it published." "I imagine there are many tales to fuel the imagination here in Kent," Sir Marcus said. "With so much history, you could write about some mystery or intrigue, or perhaps even a spy novel." "Leave off, Marcus." Jack ground out the words. "I wish to get out and stretch my legs." "Of course," Grace said, and killed the engine while the two men exited the car. She came around the Daimler and continued to stare at the ancient Roman fort. "I don't know about writing a spy novel, Sir Marcus, but when I see these ruins, I think of the battles once fought, and I'm reminded of my patriotism." She turned to him. "I'd like to write about those who perform their duty to Britain, and the brave women aiding in the war effort while our men fight the enemy overseas." Grace tipped her head. "And don't think you'll so easily put them back into the kitchens and drawing rooms once the war is over, either." Yeah, that was a big contributor to women. Sir Marcus grinned, and Grace noted the genuine humor in his brown eyes. Perhaps Claire was being too hasty to judge this man. "Such lofty ideals, Miss Mabry. But please tell me you're not one of those suffragettes," he said with a look of mock horror. "She is indeed," Jack said. Grace felt a rush of warmth as he came to stand beside her. Trying to figure out who's supposed to be speaking. I think it's Grace. "I do support the suffrage movement, though I'm not what one would consider a militant for the cause. I believe women deserve the vote, as they're making such great strides in aiding Britain. Why, they have taken over as policemen, firemen, laborers, and cleaners. They work in agriculture, make munitions, even drive ambulances back and forth from the fighting in order to save lives." "Those efforts are commendable," Sir Marcus agreed. But how do they make a woman better able to understand the intricacies of politics?" Jack's laughter cut into his friend's conversation. "Careful, Marcus, or she'll have you putting her name in for Parliament." Sir Marcus gazed at her with a look of grudging admiration. "You are a surprise to me, Miss Mabry. Would you care to take a closer look at the ruins?" "Very much," she said eagerly. "We won't be long, old boy." Sir Marcus held out an arm for Grace, but Jack intercepted her first, taking her arm. "Lead the way, Miss Mabry." At his touch, Grace felt her pulse race. Placing her hand over his, she led him as they followed Sir Marcus a short distance to a place offering perfect visibility of the ruins. "The fort is built nearly on top of the East Kent marshes," Jack said to her once they stopped. "It's probably one of the most important Roman historical sites left in Britain. You can see the natural amphitheater, the series of grass rings surrounding the center of the fort. Near the end of the Roman Empire, Richborough was abandoned and became the site of a Saxon religious settlement. It's hard to conceive of these walls being nearly 2,000 years old." Again, Grace envisioned her Roman soldiers walking the battlements. Sadly, time and progress were slowly wearing away at the stones. Scanning the distant marsh on either side of the ruins, she caught some activity. Straining her eyes, she could see what appeared to be several tents and men wearing uniforms. "What's going on over there?" She pointed toward the encampment. Sir Marcus cast a glance in the same direction, but it was a moment before he turned and narrowed his eyes at her. "What do you think it is, Miss Mabry?" Grace felt Jack tense beside her. "Some sort of training, perhaps?" she said. "But I see trucks, so maybe they're building something." "You could be correct," Sir Marcus said. She frowned. "Well, if they are doing construction of any kind, I hope they do not tamper with these lovely ruins. I would hate to see history destroyed." "Would you?" She blinked at him. What do you mean? Shall we go back? Jack gave her arm a gentle squeeze. Once they returned to the car, he commandeered his usual place in the front, with Sir Marcus slipping into the back. I thought we were taking turns riding in front, Sir Marcus said, and gave Grace a wink. You thought wrong, Jack said, and unless you care to visit a few more old places, I wish to return to the house. I've seen enough, Sir Marcus said. Very well. Miss Mabry, if you wouldn't mind. On our way. Grace again detected tension between the two men as she quickly restarted the car. Once they returned to the manor, Sir Marcus exited first. It's been a delight, Miss Mabry. He offered a slight bow. Thank you for showing me the sights of Kent. You're most welcome, Sir Marcus. Grace came around to open Jack's door. Shall I come around for you tomorrow, Lord Roxwood? She asked, hoping he would say yes. I think not. She tried not to feel disheartened. Jack must entertain Miss Arnold and Sir Marcus, while she should help her friends in the fields. I'll call for you in a few days, she said in a low voice. I'll call for you in a few days, he said in a low voice. She felt a burst of pleasure at his words, looking forward to their next adventure. Shall I take you as far as Scotland? We will have so many miles to make up for, after all. Only if you promise to avoid the potholes. At his smile, Grace's heart melted. She would take him back to Eden and, being his eyes, paint the scene with such words that he might once again relive its beauty. Wow. Sorry. You purposefully baited her. Jack seethed with fury a half-hour later as he and Marcus stood behind the closed doors of his study. You're telling me the Roman ruins are the site of a secret underground Q-port the Admiralty is building, and you took Grace there to, what, see if she'd confess to being a spy? Easy, Jack, Marcus said. I admit Miss Mabry appears to be all you told me, naive but refreshingly candid, and I don't detect any evasiveness about her. The bit about her patriotism seems real enough, with her brother fighting at the front. But the Admiralty cannot take risks, despite your feelings or my own. And while she may be pleasing to the eye and quite likable, we must know beyond a doubt her purpose here. I find it hard to believe Patrick Mabry would bribe a clerk merely because he worries about his daughter's welfare, not when construction of a new secret military port is fully underway. It would be a prize for the Germans if they knew about it. How pleasing is she, Marcus? Jack felt somewhat exposed by the question, yet his desire to know more about Grace overrode his pride. She is lovely, Jack, Marcus said, with hair a burnished shade of auburn and the greenest eyes I've ever seen. The color of ivy? He recalled Grace's description. More like emeralds, I think. Jack's heart thrummed in his chest. Emeralds. His mind flashed to the other image he kept tucked away, his goddess in green, her luminous eyes lit with passion as she'd slipped him a single white feather, a lifetime ago. Is Miss Mabry attracted to you? He asked his friend. I noticed she looks at you a lot, Jack scoffed. Haven't you heard, Marcus? In the village I'm known as the Tin Man. They cannot help but gawk at me. She wasn't gawking, Marcus said. Look, even if she had been attracted to me, I much prefer gray eyes to green, and ebony locks to all that fire. He chuckled. Though Miss Claire Danner does seem to have some of that herself. I'm afraid she wasn't too keen on my attentions. She practically ran from me when I introduced myself. Jack's tension fled. So Marcus had set his sights on another woman, not Grace. The famous Weatherford charm not working? He said, amused. She only makes me more determined, not less, old boy, Marcus said. I shall win her over. There's to be a dance in the village tomorrow night for the local boys home on leave, Jack said. I've been told the ladies of the WFC will attend. All of them? Good thing I plan to stay the weekend. I need a day or two just to recover from Paris. You haven't told me yet. How did the trial go? Short, Marcus said. Only 2 days, and they still didn't come up with any concrete evidence. It was shoddily handled, but the jury convicted her as a spy nonetheless. Mata Hari will be facing the firing squad. The news left Jack cold. While he was prepared to go to any length to find new proof against Patrick Mabry and bring him to justice, the spy mania spreading across Europe disturbed him. When convictions were handed out because of fear or prejudice instead of proof, that meant no one was safe. "Remind me never to go back to France," he said, half joking. "Speaking of which, I need to make several calls to London. If you don't mind, I'll use your study," Marcus said. "Meanwhile, you might deal with Violet. She's champing at the bit to speak with you. Can't put her off forever, you know. Care to tell me what it's about?" "She wants me to break off our engagement," Jack said. "You recall her father shelled out quite a sum to my family before she and Hugh were to marry." He sighed. "If I had inherited a windfall from a distant relation, I could have settled the debt and we wouldn't be in this fix. Stonebrook would remain solvent, and Miss Arnold could have been saved from a fate worse than death." "She wants out, does she?" Marcus growled. "Violet Arnold doesn't deserve you." "I appreciate your loyalty, Marcus. But can you blame her? What woman wants to spend her wedding night with a husband déguisé?" He pointed to the mask. "Or worse, without it." "I wish I knew what to say." "Nothing to say," Jack said, keeping his tone light. "Though I do wish—" "I know. But things have a way of working out. It may sound trite, Jack, but have faith. The truth always wins out." Jack felt the weight of his friend's hand on his shoulder. That goes for Miss Mabry as well," Marcus said. "If she's innocent, then nothing will come of today's events at Richborough. If, however, she's guilty, she'll bear the full brunt of the law. You understand that?" Jack pulled away from him. "I lost my sight, Marcus, not my ability to think." Yet, as he spoke, uncertainty gnawed at him. Had he lost his edge? Was she a spy whom he'd allowed to beguile him in his isolation? He didn't want to believe it. "You're only doing your job, Marcus, but I know you are wrong about her." "Let us hope so, my friend," Marcus said, "for your sake and hers." "Your butler said you wished to speak with me. It's about time." Violet Arnold's voice sounded from the drawing-room doors. Jack heard her enter the room and settle into the chaise longue directly to his right. "Tea?" Without waiting for her reply, he rose from the divan and went to the sideboard, where Knowles had placed a tea service and poured a cup before he left. "You've kept me waiting 2 days, Benningham. Have you been scheming with Marcus to keep me from my purpose?" "I apologize for the delay, Violet." He took the cup to her. "And no, I haven't discussed you with Marcus at all. He's working in my study at the moment, so we have the privacy you wish to resolve our issues." She took the cup and saucer from his grasp, and he heard the ensuing rattle as she set them on a table beside her. Jack caught a whiff of lilacs when she rose to stand before him. "Well?" she said. "I am here and ready to listen. What do you wish to talk about?" "Jack, must you be so dull-witted?" He felt her brush past him. The rustle of cloth revealed her pacing the room. "I want you to end this charade of an engagement," she said. "You haven't told me why." He returned to his seat on the divan. "We've gone over it countless times. I don't love you. We were ill-suited from the start." Her voice grew nearer as she approached. "I hardly need to tell you I'd rather be in London right now, but your obstinacy has forced me here to this rustic hall to speak with you face to face." "Face to face, then?" Jack reached behind his head as if to loosen his mask. "Stop!" Again he heard her swift retreat. Was she bolting for the door? Maybe she planned to scream or faint into a heap once more, Jack thought bitterly. He lowered his hands. "You say you don't love me, and that we're ill-suited." He forced the last. "But many arranged marriages have ended up being quite happy." "I loathe the idea of marrying you, Jack." Her tone took on a desperate edge. "I could never love you. Don't you understand?" "I know a woman's heart turns fickle once the groom begins to resemble a circus freak." Jack launched up from the divan. "The truth, Violet," he said. "No more games. Your reason for ending this is because you can't stomach the sight of me." "No," she said. It's because I've met someone. He paused, hearing her uncertainty. Do tell, he said, arms crossed. Another titled heir? No doubt with a face that doesn't terrify the masses? He's the Honorable Arthur Baines of Glennock. The rattle of a teacup followed the soft creak of the chaise as she remained. Let's try this again. He's the Honorable Arthur Baines of Glennock. The rattle of a teacup followed the soft creak of the I am struggling with this sentence, and I don't know why. She sat down. We met in Edinburgh months ago when my father and I attended the royal visit. I'm being tossed over for the second son of a viscount? Jack knew of whom she spoke. He'd seen the father, Viscount Moray, in the House of Lords on several occasions. Then why don't you cry off, Violet? Or are you afraid your father won't approve of you settling without a crown? Oh, yes, my father, she said, and he heard the bitterness in her tone. Always a man of action and ambition, reaching for the next prize. He started out as a rice farmer in Texas, did you know? Then within 2 decades, he managed to make a fortune in oil. He's traveled the world, been on safari. Once he even climbed the Wetterhorn in Switzerland. He heard the rattle of her cup as she again set it down. And from the first day we stepped off this ship at Liverpool, he's had his sights set on a royal heir to add to his accomplishments. I was to be his broodmare. He heard her whispered resentment before she took a deep breath and said, When I met Hugh, I thought everything would be all right. I cared for your brother Jack. But now he's gone, and you're Frankenstein, Jack supplied. I didn't say that. And you're not thinking it? I know you've never held affection for me, Benningham. What about the redhead in your dining room the night I arrived? Your hay-baling chauffeur. You seem to like her well enough. Leave Miss Mabry out of this. I only meant you must know how I feel. Why not break off our engagement? Everyone would understand your reasons. Ah, yes. Poor Jack Benningham sacrificing all to spare his betrothed from having to look at his grisly countenance for the rest of her life. And shall I remain hidden away here like Hugo's Quasimodo so the world can remain a beautiful place? Believe me, Violet, I would love nothing better. He clasped his hands behind his back. But there's the matter of the money, isn't there? We both seem to understand your father's lack of empathy to the situation. He walked to the hearth. I recall there was a time when you were eager to continue your pursuit as the future Countess of Stonebrook. So I did my duty and stepped up to take Hugh's place. I will admit, after I'd gotten used to the idea of being married, I began to put my trust in you for a relatively happy union. But that was before Arthur, she objected. He heard her rise from the chaise behind him. I think it was before this, he said, turning toward her and touching the mask. Fate stepped in, and now you've found yourself a shiny new beau, untitled, but no doubt more pleasing to look at. He paused. Perhaps this new man of yours will pay your father off. He hasn't that kind of money, she said angrily. And I do? Surely you must have some kind of inheritance or property. He could hear her resume her pacing. My father would understand if you backed out, perhaps even make a deal with you under the circumstances. I could appease him by keeping my reputation in town. And Arthur, well, he is the son of a viscount, she sighed. Don't you understand, Jack? I love him. Jack laughed, and it was hollow sound to his own ears. You do sound convincing, my dear. But what else could you say to persuade me, especially in my circumstances? A pause. I doubt you even know what love is. The rustle of cloth moved away from him. I do know. Her voice carried from across the room. Though obviously you do not. Otherwise you would show a little compassion and set me free. He heard the abrupt slam of the door as she left the drawing room. These two idiots. Oh my gosh. They're both going to make each other miserable. They're both too afraid of consequences. Gah!